I'm gonna I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I want to welcome those of you who are joining our webinar today. And this is the Waypoint 55 webinar, which is a service that Waypoint provides to churches to try and equip typically lay leaders in the church, so that we've been doing for 7 years now. And and we've got monthly webinars that are on ministry related topics in 55 minutes or less. And so this is a kind of a niche topic, but thought it was a valuable topic to bring up this time. But we've got other topics that we do in rotation for the leaders in your church. So if you're watching this webinar live today, or if you're watching it later on our YouTube channel, we would love for you to forward the links to other webinars to lay leaders in your church that would benefit from training and equipping, whether it's missions committee chairperson or prayer team or security team, elders, deacons, and so on. There's a number of webinars, over 120 webinars that we've done in the last 7 years that are specifically targeting the lay leaders in your church. And so as always, we want to begin by saying thank you to Mid-Atlantic University, who's been our partner since day one, 7 years ago, providing this service to leaders in our churches. We share the same ministry footprint in our region, trying to equip and serve churches. And so we're thankful for their partnership. And if you go to our YouTube channel, just search for Waypoint Church Partners, and you'll see all the recent webinars that we've done there that you can view and that you can forward the link to. But you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, so you get a notification anytime a new webinar has been added. And I think it says on here, as of today, we're like at 420 subscribers. So we're approaching 500 subscribers of people that will watch these videos from time to time in their particular area of ministry. Our next webinar that we're going to have next month, that we do typically one a year, about soul care, whether it's for a key leader in the church or for pastors in the church, to make sure that they're staying strong. And so Neil Wheeler on our staff is going to be providing one about finding peace when God says no to our prayers. And so we're glad that he's going to be doing that one. And the one that we most recently did was about guest services. But guest services to increase your guest experience at your church. And so those are the kinds of services or topics that we often provide to our viewers. But today we're talking about successful succession, and that's difficult to say. But we've got three leaders on our panel today that I'm going to be introducing you to you here in a moment, have them kind of give us the brief profile of their ministry that led them up to handing off the baton to the next leader at their good churches, all partnering churches of Waypoint. And so this topic of succession is one that comes up periodically for Waypoint as we're having lunch or coffee with a leader, and they've been at their church a while, and they're starting to think about, my time at this church is not going to be here forever, and how can I do some things that are going to set my successor up for success? And so there's a lot of wisdom to be found out there. And so I thought that this webinar would provide some of that wisdom from guys that have done it very recently, within the last year or two, at their churches, and how that went. And so I'm glad for that. I thought biblically, first of all, you could think about some real quick examples of good succession in the Bible, from Moses to Joshua, that we see in Joshua chapter 1. And I think everybody thought that Moses would be leading God's people for a long time, and then nope, his time came to an end, and the next guy got the baton at an interesting moment in time. And then even Elijah and Elisha, the mantle of leadership literally was passed from one to the other. And I don't know if anybody thought that Elijah would ever be outshone by anyone. And then if you know Elisha's ministry, he did as much or more than Elijah ever did in his ministry. And then it may be a bad example, but I think of Paul and Timothy in the Bible, that Paul planted the church at Ephesus in the middle 50s, and then handed the baton off to Timothy in the early 60s. And then he writes back to Timothy later on, and it sounds like he never installed elders before he left, and so he said, Timothy, you got to do it, so he left some things undone that he probably should have done. I don't want to second guess Paul, but it's to me it's very surprising that he left something that big undone for his successor to take on. And so he said, "Okay, you need to pick some godly men to lead the church. Here's the profile of what a godly man is going to look like that might lead your church." And both he and Titus had to follow up on what Paul did before he left, or didn't do before he left. So it'll be interesting to see. And I don't know if that's one of the questions I cued you guys on. Is there anything that you wish you'd have done before you left that now your successor still has to do, kind of in the example of Paul and Timothy? But we'll get to that. But we've got Mark McGee here from the Crossing in Delaware, and Todd Brown, formerly of Bridge Christian Church in Fishersville, Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley, and then Larry Jones from Northside Christian Church in Yorktown, Virginia. And Larry, after all these years, I still have a hard time saying Yorktown and not Newport News, because it was in Newport News for 100 years probably before your new building was built a mile down the street to cross the line, and now you're in Yorktown. But Northside is the church literally that helped the Waypoint get started as the Virginia Evangelizing Fellowship in 1938. It was leaders of Northside that said we need an organization that helps churches in our struggling churches in our area and to help start new ones. And so thanks, Larry, to your successors that said we need that help among our family of churches here in this area. So we stand on the shoulders of all those people way back then in 1938, and including the lady Nancy, was it Nancy, that just passed away a couple years ago?
Oh, gee, that may have been Evelyn Smith.
Evelyn Smith.
She was 99, and she was at that original meeting in Salem, I believe.
That's right. She was at the original meeting that's in Salem, the gathering that said we need to start an organization. So she was so proud of the fact that she was at that meeting. I think she was 13 years old, and so I got to give her a hug the last time I was there, right before she passed away. So thanks to Northside for that leadership. But if you guys would go ahead and share kind of a brief profile of your tenure in ministry, your church, and what it was like when you got there, and then when you left, and kind of just the genesis of your leaving, what prompted you thinking about leaving, and then we'll get into some of these other questions. But we can go kind of in the order that I just introduced you: Mark, then Todd, then Larry.
Okay. Yeah, I became the senior minister back in 1993. I'd been a youth minister in Ocean View, Delaware for almost 3 years, then came to this church. My first Sunday, there were 40 in attendance, and 20 of them were younger than 18. So I think one of the most helpful things for succession is I always valued longevity in ministry. And even from an early standpoint at Lewis, I knew that once I'm here 30 years, I'm going to need to do something different, or the church is going to need to do something different. And I think the answer was yes to both.
Mhm.
So that allowed the conversation to kind of be ongoing. And so our church operates in 3-year ministry strategies. So in one of our ministry 3-year strategies, we would verbalize that not this next 3-year strategy, but the next one will be the succession, timing. So we really announced our succession about 5.5, 6 years in advance. And that allowed all the leaders to be on the same page. And one of the blessings was everybody, because I announced it 5 years in advance from the pulpit, everybody could transition in their own mind. So I was there for 32 years, and most of the people came to Christ there. I was the only preacher they knew. So announcing it 5 years ahead of time allowed them to transition in on their own timing.
Yeah, emotionally. And give us the profile, all humility aside, but the profile of the good church that you left in January of this year compared to the 40 that you started with.
Yeah. Well, so in the 600s, and I know we'll get to this later, but since then we've grown another 100. So that's success for my successor. So
You should have left earlier.
I should have left earlier.
Yeah. There you
Sorry,
go.
Lord.
All right. All right. Yeah. Okay, Todd.
Um, well, numbers do give us context,
Yeah.
and it's good that you've shared that. And I'll share that in 1995, when when the church started in a home, there were 30 people, and we soon transferred out of the home into a Seventh-day Adventist building in Waynesboro, Virginia. Met in their chapel, and were there for 3 or 4 years. Built in Fishersville, and so I last year concluded 29 years of ministry with Bridge. And when I left, we were 1,300 plus. And in 4 services on Sunday, I, I preached 4 services in a row, and then we had a fifth on Wednesday. And so we had good growth, and blessed growth, and yet for me it was a whole lot of teaching and preaching with a challenged vocal cord disorder. That wasn't the reason I left, but it was the right time, a good time. And the elders had asked me, I don't know, 12 years ago, what the plan was. And I told them then, the plan is Stacy Burkholder. Stacy was with me for 21 years. He was a Mennonite cabinet maker who had done youth ministry in his Mennonite church. He and his family, in fact, his clan, most of his clan came to Bridge, and we set him apart to do youth ministry there. He did a tremendous job in youth ministry, and then we appointed him to be the outreach minister of the church. And Stacy's role in outreach ministry changed the church, impacted our community. And without a Bible college training or any kind of intentional ministry training, he just interned really with me for those 21 years, became a really good teacher preacher. He is one of the best men I know. Loves the Bible, is faithful to it. His Mennonite background puts him in a conservative mentality anyway. And so the plan, when the elders asked, was Stacy. I asked the elders, if I keep my health, I'd like to keep doing what I'm doing till I'm 70. And I turned 70, and so in that last year, we announced to the church a year in advance that I was retiring, Stacy was going to take over. And in that year, I preached a month, Stacy preached a month, and we got him really more preaching experience, more in front of people, more in front of new people that were joining. And so I would say my situation is unique, not only a long tenure there, but the guy that took over from me had been there for 21 years. And Tim was there. And I think, Tim, I would have to say humbly, it was a very healthy transition as transitions go. It was almost seamless. And so I'm proud of the elders, proud of how that transition went, and the church continues to grow.
Yeah, you'd have been in trouble if you hadn't picked Stacy, actually. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. Larry, how about your situation in Northside?
Yeah, mine would be different in that when I came to Northside, they were already, 80 some odd years old at the time as a congregation. And we were in an old Southern colonial style building in Newport News, and probably running about 600 or so, I would say, at the time. And the big event in our church family came in 1999 when lightning struck our steeple and burned our building to the ground. And so it was a very hard time for our people, but it was also an opportunity that we were thankful for because we were looking for a way to leave our old building and go into some new territory in the community. So we did. It took 3.5 years of sojourning. We were at high schools and Masonic lodges and theaters during that time after we left our property. And then we were able to put three little farms together where we're at now in Yorktown, just across the Yorktown line, about really only about a mile, if even that, from where the old building was. So we saw significant growth as a result of that move, and absolutely not. I think that the true catalyst was just the move, as well as the spiritual development that took place during that sojourn time in our people, sort of a cleansing time to begin anew and to vision in ways that they hadn't before. And so we went over 1,000. We actually bumped up to 1,400 for a while, and then we began to recede. And there were reasons for that, but eventually we came to the point, I came to a realization probably about 6 years ago that I was aging, not that I'm ancient, but aging. And the associate minister, our small groups guy, who's also in charge of a lot of our care ministries, he was older than I was. And we had an executive minister who used to be a youth minister. He's not ancient as well, but he was getting older. So we just felt like we needed energy as a church to go to the next place where God wanted to take us. And so we began talking as a church family within our leadership. There were some big group meetings with elders and deacons that we used to have every year when I was there, just to vision a little bit and fellowship and show gratitude for what God had done. And during one of those meetings, about 5 or 6 years before I left, we began to float the idea of a transition. I would say one of the moments in my own life and ministry that really brought this to clarity was at a North American Christian Convention when I attended the E2 conference or workshop with Gary Johnson, and it was on succession. It was the perfect timing for me, and that, of course, allowed us to use Gary later. But we then began to talk more about it, and then the pandemic hit, just about the time we were going to begin to tell the church family what our plans were. So we thought, well, let's wait. Right now, things are in such chaos and upheaval, and we have relationships that people have with me and with the other staff members. But during that time, we began to formulate a plan where I would retire, our small group, care group guy would retire. Our worship guy actually transitioned to a different career during that time as well. And Matt stayed on as the executive minister to manage the process. We came to 2022, and we made the announcement to the church family that we were going to take a year to search. I was going to be transitioning out as senior minister, and then I would hopefully spend about 8 months with the new person who was coming in. And we were fortunate to find a wonderful young man with married, of course, and with 7 children and 2 more that they were fostering in their home. So he had a huge tribe. He was from Zimbabwe, Africa, had come from the Pemberton mission family that his wife was a part of. And so he came in and we served together for 8 months, and then he took the reins. We actually had an actual baton passing in our worship service. It was a baton that we had used when we had a marathon of sorts from downtown Newport News to our new building when we celebrated our 100th anniversary. And we had passed it off to different church members for that event. And so we used that same baton to pass along the legacy of the church family to Nathan Lawson, who is our new senior guy. And he's done just a wonderful job in the 2 years that he's been there. And our associate, Larry Lamb is his name, of small groups and care groups. He's still in the church family and focusing on one of his care groups, which is Celebrate Recovery. And so it's been a great experience, and we feel like it was a healthy experience, and feel that we've continued a great legacy of the church.
Yeah. Larry and Todd both kind of introduced their successors, one on staff, one in the search. Mark, give us real quick your successor there at the crossing, and then we're going to get into these questions that I asked you guys to be prepared for. But where did you find your successor?
Yeah, so our successor actually became a Christian at our church family. Then went off to college, got an education degree, came back and realized, hey, I think the Lord wants me in ministry. He became our children's minister, then our associate minister. And after serving for 15 years on staff, he said no, went on sabbatical. And after sabbatical, he said, the Lord has been beating me up. I think he wants me to do it. So we interviewed him, and it was obviously God's intent, and he's doing incredible. His name's Adam Woods. We have been serving together for more than 15 years, really have become the best of friends, and that's where he came from.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump into these questions. And for those of you who are viewing live, if you've got a question for either Todd or Mark or Larry as they're talking, go ahead and hit the Q&A button, and I'll get notified that you've got a question. But the first question is, you guys have been a year or two in handing the baton off. Larry handed the baton off literally. Mark, I think you handed the baton to Adam. Do I remember the
Yep.
photos of
Yep.
that? So,
Yep.
Todd, I was never at Bridge, even though that was my home church. I don't know if there was a physical baton handed off.
The keys off.
Oh, you gave him the keys. There you go.
He's the
Yep.
kingdom.
Yeah, there you go. But now that you've handed the baton off to these guys, what's the one or two things that you think you've done the best to set each of your successors up for success? There's probably lots of things, but if you could give wisdom to people that would be viewing either live today or on YouTube, hey, if you're going to do one thing, don't miss this that we did to set them up for success. What would that be?
So I think one of the best things is we intentionally, well, we can call it intentional grooming. And for 2 years, Adam and I would have a weekly appointment where we would sit together, and he could ask any questions to me with regard to him taking the baton. So just providing weekly hour just to ask good questions with that in mind was really helpful. And again, announcing the succession 5 years in advance allowed everybody to welcome and receive it's going to be him. And by the time it came that I passed the baton, everybody welcomed it with joy and
Yeah.
to welcome him. Yeah.
So I'm over all that time. There was plenty of time, plenty of questions. But what would be the kind of questions Adam might ask you about stepping into the roles, big picture or real finite?
Yeah. Well, a
Technical.
lot of it was, Mark, I've been thinking about this. How have you handled this? And it was very specific questions. I'm like, oh, that's a good one. I would have never thought to tell you about that. That's a good one. But even from, budgeting things to dealing with difficult people to, but he took it serious, and he had very specific questions, itemized. Basically, we ne we he had more questions than we had time to answer in an hour time during a week.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, but it's really just great coaching and mentoring in general, with succession being the purpose
yes.
for leadership coaching. It sounds like, yeah. Todd, how about you as far as setting Stacy up for success? What would be your biggest point of advice?
Sure. Well, I realize that people listening, many have not had the advantage that I've had of your successor being with you 21 years.
Mm-hmm.
And even before we announced it, a year ahead, people already knew. I mean, when you told the elders 10 years earlier, that word got out, and that was good. That was healthy. And Stacy grew. He even though he did his job well, he knew what was coming. The other advantage I had was Stacy had been full time for a long time and a fellow elder. I was an elder all my tenure there, and Stacy became an elder years ago. And so much of the DNA of Bridge was created by Stacy in all those formative years. As an elder, he joined me in making really important decisions. And so he really understood how Bridge worked. He understood the nature of our community, the nature of our people. And Tim, because you were there for a number of years at the end, you saw his presence, his input was just woven into everything. And so
Yeah.
while very few people have that advantage in transition, it turned out to be the best thing for him, for me, and really for the health of the church. You all have heard it's crude, but in our business, we've said before that the new guy is sometimes the sacrificial lamb. It takes one transition to get to the next guy. I don't know how true that is, but it just wasn't the case with Stacy, and I couldn't be happier. Literally, Bridge hasn't missed a beat.
Yeah. Well, there are many of those stories about the guy that is there for 3 years or 5 years as the bridge, no pun intended, to the guy that actually gets to stay longer. So for your successions, we're hoping that that's not the case here, that I think you all are doing that really well. Larry, same for you. What now looking back after a couple of years, what do you think best set Nathan up for success?
Yeah, I think my situation is different than Todd and Mark's in that Nathan wasn't there for any time before he came. He was he came in cold turkey as a new guy, but that lends to the things that I think were important, and that is first of all we had to make sure we had an attractive process because the person who was coming wasn't familiar with our church, and as you know, you don't really get the full picture if you're not in the church, and good guys are pretty leery of churches in transition, especially if the old guy thinks he might be around for a little bit. So we had to make sure we had a good process that a new candidate would be very comfortable with, and that kind of leads to the personal aspect from my standpoint as the old guy, if you will. I'll just use that term here. It was important that I do everything possible to make sure that Nathan knew that he was stepping into an ethical, a fair situation that would help him succeed. And one of the things that E2 helped us with was the development of a good contract that was clear and concise as far as the responsibilities that I might have in the transition, the things that I would not do, the things that I would do. And I had good schooling through the years to teach me what the ethics might be in that situation. But we've all seen bad transitions that were really made that way because the guy going out just didn't conduct himself in a very good way. So I think that what we did for Nathan was to make sure he had a clear, concise process, and there were clear boundaries, and he knew that I was fully in on the process and didn't have to be nervous coming into a situation where someone had been there for 28 years and might be jealous or feel a need to undermine his ministry. So we also, when we had a retreat with Gary Johnson about, I think maybe 3 months before Nathan was able to come on board, we already knew that he was the next guy, and we were recasting our vision as a leadership, and so Nathan had an opportunity to take part in that process, and came all the way from Zimbabwe for for a week to be there for the retreats. And so that was really helpful because when he came in, then that was his vision along with the church leadership.
Yeah. We're going to get into this in just a second about resources, but for those that are watching today or on YouTube, one of the good ministry partner friends that we have are E2 Effective Elders, and we work with them quite a bit, have them in our region, recommend them to a lot of churches, a lot of times for elder support and training, but also for some other strategic processes like this, like in a transition. Waypoint's able to help many churches with their hiring process as well, um, or strategic planning, but we refer people to E2 elders a lot because of how well they do with churches just like Northside in a transition like that. So glad that you use them. So that's the question of what you guys did well, which is great input. Now looking backwards a couple of years, if you could do it all over again, what's something that you would maybe change in the process now in hindsight?
Okay. I think the first thing we would have changed it from the get-go, or at the very beginning, I used the word transition. And so then the joke was that I was in transition, that I was transitioning.
Mhm.
In our culture, that might not be the best word. So succession is way better. Once I handed the baton, I took a 3 month hiatus of, just to kind of be out of Adam's hair a little bit. And I think the thing I wish both of us agree that I could have helped the church better is this after that 3 months, if I was a little bit more involved, even if it was doing the Lord's Supper from time to time, or I've preached a couple times, but I think I caused some grief with some of our church family that I think my presence a little more often would have been better. Um, and I think the one thing I think would have made it better is my wife Angel and I did not anticipate the grief we personally would have. Because I got involved in preaching at other churches, helping other churches, so we were gone a lot. And we really went through a grief process of
Mhm.
missing our church family that we're so close to for 32 years. So I need to help some guys going into succession that grief is part of it. And that was kind of hard.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. And you said you got out of Adam's hair, but he's got the same haircut you've got. So,
He's
uh,
pretty bald, so
yeah,
that was
no,
easy. That was
that's a
easy.
bad analogy, but yeah, the grief process, that'd be a whole other conversation we could have for people on this call. Again, if people are watching, we'd love to connect with you with any of our panelists if they after the fact, if you'd like to talk with them. If you need to talk with Todd Brown about how in the world do you do 4 services on a Sunday, I get a lot of calls on how you set up for two, going to two or three. I've never got a phone call on how do I go to a fourth service, but Todd would be my one and only recommendation on how to do that. He did it without a voice, so that was pretty impressive. But Todd, looking backwards now after just a year, what or even was it January for you as well? Yeah, so you and Mark are both been just a year, not even. But what would you do differently now, looking back just over the past year?
I'm saying this humbly. I don't know. I've really thought about this. I'm sure there's something we would have done differently, but I don't have any regrets. And part of that largely is due to Stacy. Stacy anticipating the transition. He did reading. He looked in to other transitions and how they worked. And bless his heart, he wanted it to be a successful transition for me. He wasn't there was no Absalom in him at all. He just wanted my wife Karen and I to have a wonderful year of celebration along the way. And he and his team put together a wonderful send off for me. Brought in, it was like my funeral service. There were people that came in and surprised me on a Sunday morning. He did a great job. In fact, if anyone out there wants to know how to do transition well, they should be talking to Stacy Burkholder at Bridge because he did it not for himself, but for me. And he made my transition amazing.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, we are going to do a session, Mark, on transitioning pastors. That should get a lot of hits on our YouTube channel.
I almost made the mistake. The plan was that after I retired fully, I would stay on a year. And the Lord had a different idea. Things developed here in Joplin very quickly. And it's so good that I moved on.
hmm,
And and it's been good for the church for me not to be there.
yeah, all right. Larry, what's the one or two things that you'd give advice to about things that you wish you might have done a little differently?
I had to laugh at what Todd said about his funeral because the people that put our goodbye services together and celebration, they actually used some information I'd given them in the event of my funeral. As far as my favorite songs, we had a choir singing "Oh Happy Day" and some other things like that. So it really was literally my funeral. But yeah, I kind of concur with Mark on the grieving process. And one of the unfortunate things is that due to some of the leadership meetings that you have that are pretty sensitive and you have to keep them private for a while, your wives really aren't able to be as engaged in that as you are. And so just being aware that they go through a grieving process as well. And we went to an area church that was in need of a minister for 10 months after I retired. And yet we were close by, but just that alone, the stress of trying to have two church families, trying to go to a meal every now and then in one or the other and show support and love for both families was hard. Throughout the years, I think I alluded to this. I've had some very good counsel on how to be the good last guy and not to be a problem, but I don't know that I ever went to a seminar or that my wife and I ever went to a seminar on how a couple in ministry deals with the emotion of the transition. So I might look to see if those things were available. They may not be.
Yeah.
Maybe Mark, you and Todd and I could start one for for husbands and wives going through transition. But I agree with that the emotional side and the grieving process were something I wasn't fully prepared for.
Yeah. And I'm glad you guys brought that up. And just thinking out loud, I don't know if it'd be valuable as you're creating your succession agreement that you would include in that, that the elders would find and pay for counseling for both of you, but particularly maybe even private counseling for your wife to walk through that season with a Christian counselor that could help them through that. That might be a valuable component of a succession agreement.
Mhm.
Well, some of you have alluded to this already, but I'm curious what resources you tried to track down to help you craft a succession plan or get wisdom from. Larry's already talked about some just physical support from the guys at E2 Elders, Gary Johnson in particular, and I don't know, Larry, if you referred to his book, but he's got a book. Trying to remember the title of it that I've referred to others. I know Mike Lynn is on the call, and that it was on his shelf when we first started talking about succession with him. So I'm curious what resources you went out and found, whether it was seminars, webinars, books, or individual, mentors that could help you walk through crafting a transition strategy.
Sure. I really is my personal connection with Bob Russell and Gary Johnson. And honestly, there were a couple of Waypoint podcasts that where Dyke and Rebecca interviewed some guys in succession, and they made some very pointed, just some statements that are like, oh man, that'll be helpful. So it's really my personal connection with, especially Bob and Gary, watching their models, asking really personal questions that helped us the most, I think.
All right, great.
Yep.
Thanks for the plug on the Waypoint podcast. This is the Waypoint webinar, but we've got a podcast that drops 2 episodes a month with all good leaders, mostly from our region. And so if you want to check that out, you can look at any of your podcast platforms for the Waypoint podcast. But I know Todd has been on the podcast at least once as well with our talking about soul care, I believe. But anyway, Todd, what kind of resources did you try to work from or find to help you craft a plan?
Well, I'm sure that everyone listening understands there's a difference between I'm transitioning into another ministry. It's time to leave here and go to the next. That's very different than retiring.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're talking about two kinds of transitions here. And so we read the books and we were ready for the transition. But the best resource found me. a man in our church who had been, he was a retired minister and was now a life coach for executives. He said, Todd, you need to come talk to me. I didn't want uh, to be coached, but he said, Todd, I of course wouldn't expect this from you, but one of the highest rates of suicide in America are executives, busy executives that retire and have nothing to do, and they sink into depression, and many of them take their life. And he said, the long and short is our coaching session, and there were many. He said, I don't want you to think about retiring. I want you to think about, I don't couch it that way. Let's talk about what your new vocation is going to be. How are you going to be used by God in this new arena, this new opportunity? And so, if I had not had that coaching to think, there's the year of celebration and everyone's patting you on your back. Thank you but boy, it would have been a sudden stop into despair, I think. There were enough challenges as it were, but much of what he coached me over helped me prepare for this next phase that you're never prepared for. You never do it. And so, since I've been in Joplin, I have thought and I've prayed, my wife has prayed, Lord, what's the next place for me? I don't want to be another senior minister. Those years are gone. But I believe God is going to use me in this next phase intentionally and purposely. And I would recommend men who are retiring from ministry get coached up about that next phase.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, that's super. I wouldn't have thought of it that way. Larry, same way, unless it's just reiterating your
Well, and I'll give you another plug here that, of course, I had met Gary Johnson at the North American, but the time I appreciated with him most was when he was at the Waypoint event. I believe it was in Richmond, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Fairmount.
Yeah, and that was just a very good refresher, and also I had more time with him, so that was very meaningful. My in my succession transition, I looked probably, I think 3 years down the road myself as to where I might land when I was finished, and I began to enroll in clinical pastoral education units. I don't know if you all are familiar with those, but they're the sort of the precursor units to chaplaincy. And so I took one of those at Riverside, and it involves clinical chaplaincy as well as peer review and peer group, really some very honest and unabashed evaluations of other people in that group. And so I did one there. I did another at the VA in Hampton with some Navy guys. And then when I was finished with the ministry at Northside, I jumped right into a residency, which was a full-time CPE 4-unit program for a year at the VA. And I was in a psych wing for 6 months there at the VA. So, and also had these bi-weekly meetings with Navy chaplains. And in a very ironic way, that transition became my psychotherapy for a year. In fact, my supervisor was a trained psychotherapist, and so I echo a little bit of, I know, Todd, you weren't particularly talking about psychotherapy or counseling per se, but those peer groups that I had during that first year out of full-time senior ministry leadership, they were extremely valuable. And that's where I had an opportunity to be honest about my feelings, my grief, to cry, to have honest feedback on where I was, how I was processing my experience. And so I would just reiterate that general frame of finding trusted people that you can be honest with. And if possible, I don't know how you would do this because we are in a niche, maybe through Zoom, but if possible, to find a peer group of people that are in a similar situation that you can walk through at least that first year with to share the things that you're experiencing.
Yeah, well, that's sounds like there's a recurring theme here, both for you guys individually, but then your wives as well, is for anyone listening to this webinar today, to not underappreciate the importance of self-care, soul care, during the transition for both you and your wife, not just the logistics of the succession and at the church, but for you all personally. Well, I want to ask one final question here for you guys. It's great wisdom that you're giving, and oh, I've got one more question here coming from Bill Newton at the Avalon Church that we got to help during their hiring just very recently. But the question I'd ask for you guys to think about is what's a positive change or two that your successors already made that you, when you first saw it or heard about it, you go, I'm saying that they're going to start doing that, or they're going to kill that. Either way, that now has turned out better than you would have imagined, and you're glad that they're the leader.
Yeah, two things. So Adam immediately made a couple of staff changes, bringing on two staff members who have been incredible, like better than anybody could have imagined, and allow, just him having the freedom to make that decision was so good. And then he jumped right into our 3 year strategy is called Build, which we knew at some point in the 3 years would incorporate a financial campaign and a new building campaign. Well, he just took the bull by the horns and he jumped into it, and it's been amazing. The plans are awesome, and the leadership team has already met the middle goal in those campaigns, and it's about to go to the church this coming weekend. So he is on fire.
Whew, all right.
Yeah,
Very rarely does a new guy start a capital campaign immediately, but
he
that
did
says,
it.
there you go. That says a lot about Adam.
Yeah,
And it's going really well. That's right.
yeah.
Todd, same way about you. What have you seen Stacy do that you're like, wow, all right, there we go.
Well, one of the things he may not appreciate at all was even before COVID, we started developing building plans. And um, 2 months after I retired, they broke ground, and I've left him with a big new auditorium and a building project. But again, he was very involved with that from the start. One of the things that Stacy always had a heart for, a bigger heart about it than mine, frankly, was staff relations, and he's done um, really wonderful things to make that our church staff more cohesive, more in love with each other. In fact, they early on, after I left, had a staff retreat. I think just to, among other things, talk about the transition. So he's done a great job, a much better job than I ever did in in building close heartedness with our staff.
All right. Larry, same question.
Yeah, I'd say also the Nathan has had four hires since I left, and they've all been great hires. Two of them were major ministry roles in as a small group guy, a discipleship guy, and also a worship guy. And they're beginning the rooted system in January. And what he has done that I didn't do in the last several years of my ministry was he's done a very good job, I think, of pulling together the elders and staff in retreat formatted events to get them all on the same page, their mind and their hearts. And he's, of course, taken them all through Rooted with the new discipleship guide. They've all gone through the marriage enrichment class together for 10 weeks, Reengage, if you're familiar with that. And I think that's just been such a blessing as far as his future in not only allowing him to get to know the elders and the staff better, but as a team, building some just more of a fellowship and understanding, and again being with the same heart and mind for the days ahead. So, and they wrote up new bylaws, which I didn't have the courage to do in the last couple of years. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to manage any outcome that wasn't desirable.
Well,
So,
that
so
that
I put it
segues
on.
that segues in real quickly, and I want to get to Bill's question here, but real quickly, I alluded to that is the Apostle Paul left the installation of elders for his successor. What's one thing that you left for your successor that you would give advice to other people? Go ahead and do it yourself. You can take the heat, and then he doesn't have to worry about it. Todd left a whole building. Said, "Here's the keys. You got to do the whole building project." Larry left the bylaws to be done. But anything else that you would advise people considering succession in the near future, go ahead and get this done so your successor doesn't have to do it.
Yeah, even that for us, it was staff handbook along with bylaw cleanup. But I got to the point I couldn't do it. And I felt bad. I'm like, Adam, I'm sorry. This is yours.
All
I
right.
wish I would have finished it. So that would have been off his plate.
Yeah. All right. Todd or Larry, any other thing other than what you've already said?
It's been a
Wait,
great experience, and I would just say when I first started hearing about succession, it scared me because succession means you're leaving,
mhm.
and so I would just say don't be afraid of it. I mean, keep the circle small if you need to at first with some trusted leaders, but think about it, plan for it, and prepare your own life with who you'll be when you're not a senior minister or whatever ministry role you have, and of course financially as well. And so you just have to look ahead and realize that you're not going to get younger. I know we hear that all the time, but you're you're just going to move in one direction, and sooner or later you're going to have to make that decision. So don't be afraid to plan.
Yeah. All right. Well, here's one last question came from Bill from Avalon Church, who's an elder. So, what advice could you give to elder? What's something that your elders or leaders did for you that was the most meaningful for you? That you would give other elders. Hey, if you would do this for your guy, it would mean a lot to them. Of course, you guys described, some great, send offs. But what else? What other than a great send off event? What else would you advise to elders to make the transition meaningful for the senior leader leaving?
Well, it really was just open, honest, early conversation about it. Um, Knowing that all of them were praying about it. And really, our team was just so blessed with great unity. So our leadership and staff grieved first before the church knew about it. And so just having that early conversation, they were just incredible leaders, knowing the future demands we do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Uh,
Anything meaningful that you remember, Todd?
yeah, I would say um, when it's a transition, they're looking for a new guy. They're asking for resumes. The elders are usually very involved in that process. I don't know how involved the elders are when it's retirement. Um, my elders were very involved. They were part of the planning. They knew every step of the way, and so I would say if it's a retirement transition, to make sure the elders are involved, and it's not just a committee preparing a send off for the retiring guy.
Yeah. Okay. Larry, any other thoughts on your end for that as far anything any leaders did for you that was very meaningful?
Yeah, it was the personal things. I'm sure Todd and Mark had these experiences as well. The invitations to go out to eat, just to share some perspective on the last years of ministry, and how meaningful those had been for all of us together. And that send off is a big deal. I mean, I know it. I mean, it makes you feel really good to have someone throw a party for you. That's good.
Mhm.
But the things that they say, the time and the effort that's put into recognizing not just what your senior minister has done, but what God's done through you together to celebrate that time together. That I think I treasured that more than anything. Just
Mhm.
knowing that the 28 years I'd spent at Northside had been meaningful for all of us.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to connect any of our viewers with any of these three, particularly about that. That is if you want advice on how to do a great send-off that honors them and what God has done through them, through their ministry, or how to begin crafting a communication plan, or what the elders, if we can provide a resource to help with initial perspective on how to do that, we'd love to connect you with the right people. But I want to thank our three panelists, friends here today. I didn't say some of the big news. If you've received the Waypoint Endeavor this week in the mail, that Mark is joining the Waypoint staff in January officially and going to be a regional catalyst. So we are pretty excited about that. And we'll finally give him something to do because he's just been around twiddling his thumbs for a year. We had to get him to quit saying yes to churches, helping them so he could come work with us. So we're pretty excited about him joining our staff. But all three friends of ours in ministry, and we'd love for you to connect with them if you've got questions on how to have a great succession plan at your church. So thanks for your time, gentlemen. But more than that, thanks for your great leadership at great churches in our region. And it's your leadership that's a big testimony to why they're great churches. So thanks for your time. And again, we invite you to join future Waypoint webinars as they come up each month, and particularly to recommend to your church leaders for the ones that are for their particular area of ministry that we can serve and support them. Thanks for your time, and we hope to see you on another webinar. Have a great night.
I'm John Maurice, president of Mid-Atlantic Christian University. For 77 years, Mid-Atlantic Christian University has stood the test of time, remaining faithful to Christ and His church. Today, we continue our mission of educating extraordinary Christian leaders to serve in the church and in the marketplace.
No matter where you look, we need Christian leadership to help us to be the people God has called us to be. And so we want to equip leaders that can make a difference no matter where God leads them.
Each individual has particular unique capabilities, and what we want to do is enable them to develop into the leaders that God desires for them to be.
Our department is to try and help people to see themselves in God's story and to strengthen their ability to continue to use God and the Bible in their own ministry, whatever that may be.
We have two brand new buildings on our campus. We have Heritage Hall, which is our academic building, which has state-of-the-art classrooms, technology, learning aids. It is a fantastic building. It is extremely important to have facilities that are going to help students facilitate learning. We also have a brand new dining facility, Allagood Commons, and the Mustang Cafe. And it is a great asset and a resource for us as it helps establish a place of community for all of our students, staff, and faculty, and even community members who come and share meals in our cafeteria. We are blessed indeed by the campus that God has given us to use for His glory. Mid-Atlantic Christian University would not be able to exist if it were not for our donors, whether they are individuals or churches who support us regularly with finances and with prayer. We exist only by the grace of God.
My favorite part about serving is seeing the students grow. To see freshmen come in, often not knowing what they want to do in life, and to see them to develop into the leaders God's called them to be, and then go out and make a difference. I love hearing the stories of students and hearing their journeys and to help them as best I can to become who God's called them to be.
I am excited about what God is going to do to impact the world through this institution, and Mid-Atlantic is glad to be a part of God's plan.